was 5 years ago, almost to this very day, March 2009, that I found myself in a very rural and remote part of sub-Saharan Africa, northwest Mozambique, a state called Niassa, and a small town called Lushinga. Here I was, sitting with the team. It was starting to get chilly, summer turning to autumn, yet we were buzzing. We were sitting down and we were talking about budgeting and planning. How on earth could we be buzzing, talking about budgeting and planning? Well, it was really exciting. We had helped to set up a small business, a small social enterprise, to make and sell jam. And it was going really well. How on earth did I get there? What was I even doing? Well, a couple of months earlier, when I was in the capital of Mozambique, in Maputo, a couple of colleagues came back from visiting Lushinga and brought back this unbelievably tasty jam, whatever the seasonal fruit was at the time, pumpkin, guava, peach. And it was absolutely delicious, literally melt in your mouth stuff. Now, what I didn't mention to you about this women's association is that it's a women's association for HIV-positive people. And during the day, these women would support each other as they were completely ostracized and marginalized in society. And in the evenings and weekends, they would get together and make jam. And you know, it was so tasty when I had it in Maputo that I and some of my colleagues from the Clinton Foundation, where I was working, thought, well, what if I could spend time with this group of people and help them to create a process that could actually be a business? So up I went, budgeting and planning, sales and promotion, production and quality. I'm thrilled to say it went really well. They started generating an income, no longer seeing themselves, or indeed society seeing them as sort of passive recipients of handouts, but actually active agents in their own futures. And Maria Elena, who you see in the photo there with the pen and paper, literate, numerate, ended up being asked by the Red Cross to help set up other similar social enterprises across the state and later the country to bring some of these opportunities to other HIV-positive women. And what really struck me as I looked back wasn't just that I was contributing in some small way towards helping these individuals to have an income for themselves and their families, but actually that there was a sense that we were doing what I found a phrase later really resonated, but folding into the core of what we did, the sense of dignity and not dependence, choice, not charity, a phrase that swirled in my mind ever since I first read it. Now, before you think of me as some kind of, good Samaritan, let me just tell you what I was doing maybe 6 years to this day ago, and 7 and 8, and actually 9 years before that, because yes, actually, I'm a former investment banker. And I was sitting on the trading floors of JP Morgan, where I worked for that period. And please don't comment on how youthful I look in that photo. Literally, where they were, I was kind of this exemplar as for the graduate recruitment onwards, because I actually really enjoyed it and had a very fulfilling time during that period. And what I want to share with you today is I don't think that experience that I had in finance and in business, if I hadn't had that experience, I don't think it would have informed some of the successes that we had with Jam de Kamelane. And I think it's this interconnection, this interdependence, is really the idea with that frontier that I want to share with you today. I guess in many ways you have to look back to, where you grew up and how you came to the position you're in. I remember actually when I was in university, I was actively involved in the Students' Union and, elected as faculty convener and marching in the government for free fees and so on, which we were doing at the time in Ireland, I remember well. But I was also actually involved in running the Business and Economic Society, and even though I wasn't being deliberative at the time, these two areas sort of seemed to be perfectly reconcilable to me. And one of the great fortunes of working in finance was the ability to travel. And in January 2005, I went to South Africa and managed to get to see Robben Island, which many of you will know is where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 28 years in prison. I was there for a friend's wedding. We had a fantastic time. And then managed to spend some time really trying to understand this incredibly complex, incredibly beautiful country. And my head was swirling as I read about and listened to what the great Madiba was doing when he was in prison to understand better social justice, social inclusion, and equality for all. My head was abuzz, and actually as I was leaving, I was in Cape Town Airport, and I saw the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown. A man vilified by many, I actually think perhaps excessively so. You can have your own view. But one of the fantastic things that he did as Chancellor at the time was he was at the end of a trip where he was negotiating for the debt relief for over £30 billion for countries across sub-Saharan Africa, where they would then no longer have to pay this money to foreign bondholders, but actually be able and enabled to spend that money on health and education in their own countries. And I saw him at the airport, and I kind of just punted it and went up to him and shook his hand, and I said, you know what, as a taxpayer, I just want to say thank you. I think this is really incredible work. And he was very kind, and he engaged me for about 10 minutes. And after that conversation, what struck me was we ended up talking about finance and economics towards achieving social justice and poverty eradication and inequality. And something in me really stirred. So I started reading and read books from the left, from the right, pro-capitalism, anti-capitalism, big state, small state, theology, you name it, just to try and understand a little bit more and maybe to ask some better questions. I also then started doing more and more activities in the evenings and weekends. You know, I ran a marathon in London, raised money for the wonderful charity Shelter, and realized that actually as I was doing all this, it wasn't enough of what I was doing during the evenings and weekends, but actually even what I was doing during the day, I needed something a little bit more and see if I could combine the two. And the adage for me held true that if you want to know where your heart is, look to where your mind goes when it wanders. And with very fortuitous timing, before the whole sort of financial crisis, JP Morgan supported me to go on a sabbatical. And it took me, my first step, to India, where I was born and where I'm originally from. India is often described as the hotbed of social innovation, and I really wanted to learn a little bit more. And I had read one particular program that was being run and sort of a methodology that I found fascinating called Microfinance. And it was really led and initiated almost 30 years ago by this man who I was incredibly fortunate to meet, Professor Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in microfinance, where the idea was you could lend small amounts of money to women otherwise deemed too poor to bank, enable them to actually use that for productive use, repay you so that money could be used again and again. It was thrilling, and I thought this was fascinating, but actually, when I spent time understanding more, I kind of naively initially thought this was a silver bullet and it was going to work, and very quickly realized that no such things really exist. And moreover, in this experience that I had with microfinance, that actually there was a real loss of purpose, that investing as the means towards achieving these social goals had been confusing, where investing just became the ends again and really was just the conventional world of finance, which left me deeply disappointed. And I ended up writing a piece which pushed a few people, pushed a few buttons, let's say, called The Dangers of Leverage in Microfinance at the time. But what it did do was inform me that there was tremendous opportunity and there were tremendous leaders out there in the world actually using some of these concepts towards goals that resonated with me and so many others. So I closed my eyes and jumped, and I left the world of finance, and as I mentioned, it took me to Mozambique. This is by no means a fairy tale story. There were many highs and many, many lows. Maria there in the center ended up dying a couple of months after I was there from AIDS. It was really rather devastating and an acute reminder of what can and can't happen, what needs to be done, and the urgency with which we need to address some of these issues. I'd also spent a couple of months previously seconded into the Ministry of Health for the Clinton Foundation, leading some major programs, the application for funding from the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And really made me think that if I really wanted to be serious about this shift, I needed to go back and study. So I decided to go back mid-career to study a Master of Public Administration at the London School of Economics. And when I was there, I reached out to an organization that I had met on my sabbatical, led by a really incredible person who's become a mentor and a complete inspiration to me, a lady called Jacqueline Novogratz, who founded an organization called Acumen Fund and wrote this book called The Blue Sweater, also having great impact on me and highly recommended for those interested. Jacqueline herself was a former banker and had worked for many, many years trying to consider this idea, but rather than considering it in microfinance, she had a little bit of a different idea. And where she started from was a quite beautiful phrase that you may have heard of: dignity, not dependence, choice, not charity. And how she was inculcating that into the core of what she did was to take it a little bit differently, was to receive charitable donations. If you think in finance terms, the most risk-oriented capital, people who make charitable donations aren't looking for it back. So it therefore allows you to take risk, to back innovation, to understand where markets fail and bypass the poor, and government and aid fall short. And so to use that money to make investment that allow you to be patient, where conventional finance isn't prepared to go, what she calls patient capital, help to grow these social enterprises to the point where they're achieving impact at scale, and then look to exit the money and then be able to recycle it again and again. It was a complete epiphany, aha moment when I first heard that described to me when I was in Hyderabad in India on my sabbatical. And it's actually the organization where I've now worked for the last almost 3 years. And what struck me about Acumen's model wasn't just this concept that Jacqueline and the team put forward, but perhaps even more importantly, understanding how to make decisions. Not the what that they do, but how they do it as well. And often if you find organizations, they talk about their values and they use sort of platitudes and big words, but Acumen's values struck me as a really powerful concept. That actually this work is really difficult and really messy. And it's navigating values in tension that will better help us understand some of these critical decisions that we need to make. Underpinned by respect and integrity, listening has to be core, but you have to lead as well. Humility is critical, but you need to be audacious. That you need to be generous in all that you do, but you have to remember to be accountable as well. And to understand that tension and that balance in the decisions made in backing these organizations is perhaps going to push us forward. And so when I was a student, I ended up working with one specific company focused on renewable energy in India, with this gentleman called Ganesh Pandey, a social entrepreneur. He was in the west coast of America, doing very well as an engineer, originally from the state of Bihar in northern India, in the rice belt of India, state of 90 million people, 80 million people of whom don't have access to energy, to electricity, energy. And so Ganesh, as an engineer, developed a really fascinating and fabulous technology to burn and gasify the waste product from producing rice husk, which you can see him pouring in here. And because in the rice belt there is such an abundance of this product, in even the most remote of villages, to create mini grids of electricity, to then pipe that, using literally bamboo poles as the pylons, into housing. And his innovation was such that this electricity for 6 hours a day could be provided for 100 rupees, so about £1 per household per month. And with people paying for electricity rather than being seen again as the sense of a passive recipient of handout, they demanded quality, they demanded after-sales service, and it was incumbent on Ganesh's company, Husk Power Systems, to provide that. Acumen made a large, almost $1 million investment in the organization to help it to grow. I spent some time with the organization, along with some colleagues from the LSE, writing a report to see how we could better understand and measure some of the impacts that were happening for this electricity. Because actually what was striking was it wasn't just electricity unto itself that was important, but actually some of the health outcomes that we saw. People not having to inhale kerosene, which the WHO says equivalent to smoking 40 cigarettes a day. Kids being able to study in the evening. And frankly, if you spend time in these really dark, remote villages in Bihar and see a village with electricity and a little bit of a buzz in the village center, it's not just about the economic productivity, as critical as that is, but it's actually about happiness and well-being. Isn't that really the key towards this? And so Acumen has been investing in these companies across sub-Saharan Africa and East and West Africa, in South Asia, India and Pakistan, and most recently in Latin America. And it's focused on 6 different sectors: health, energy, agriculture, housing, water, sanitation, education, and employability. And has made over 70 investments, and those companies have touched the lives of over 100 million people. But you may recall that when I said that I have been working for Acumen for the last 3 years, it's because the next stage has come to happen for me. Because I'm actually leaving Acumen next month. And along with some friends and colleagues, I'm setting up an organization to think about poverty and inequality in the UK, called Social and Sustainable Capital. It's a little bit different. Access to electricity or sanitation and toilets may not quite be the same that we have here. But actually, absolute poverty does exist, and relative poverty certainly does, and inequality, devastatingly, is only increasing. And whether that's in London or Liverpool or from Durham down to Devon, we know that there's a real need to understand the what, the sense of using investing as a means of tackling some of these issues, but also working to sort of fold in the how of how we do this work, and understanding who we support, innovative social enterprises and charities to do this. And we'll be working in close conjunction with a great organization in the UK called the Social Investment Business Group to really see if we can find these community-based organizations to achieve that. Because I think there is a lot we can learn from the experiences of Acumen and others working in the UK and across the world because of this sense of interconnection and interdependence. I really ultimately think it comes back to the great man, Nelson Mandela, and what he called Ubuntu. I am because you are. Because this sense of poverty and inequality isn't just about the economic costs and the risks, which are significant, but it's also that loss of ability and capabilities that matter as well. And ultimately, taking that forward is what I believe is the idea without a frontier, and will mean that we can think about dignity and not dependence, and choice, not charity, for us all. Thank you very much indeed.